and also Surviving the Cataclysm, Your Guide to the Worst Financial Crisis in Human History. So that is where we are in this world economic depression, which we'll be talking about significantly in this program. Let us begin with the Obama health bill. This has now been enacted, and the so-called fix, the reconciliation, has also been fully passed by both houses, and the fix will be signed by Obama sometime next week. Now, this is a triumph of the strategy of Rahm Emanuel. That is a strategy of blackmail, intimidation, threats, personal destruction, destroying the careers of a number of people in Congress to terrorize the rest of them, people like Massa going down, people like Rangel being deprived of his committee chairmanship, Conyers threatened with the same thing, and many others. And it's also a story of the cowardice and capitulation of left-wing Democrats, the Kucinich types, who know very well, Kucinich in particular knows extremely well, that this is a bailout of the insurance companies. It represents the Mussolini fascist corporate state. What we see here is insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies have seized control of the U.S. federal government and are using U.S. federal government as a collection agent, as a bill collector for these predatory, for-profit, deregulated insurance companies and all their golden parachutes and all their despicable derivatives and their inherent bankruptcy. The right-wing slogan chanted by the Republicans, the litany of the Republicans that this is a government takeover, is a big piece of stupidity. It is the opposite of what is actually happening. This is not socialism. This is not the government expropriating the owners of the insurance companies and nationalizing those firms and operating them as a state sector under U.S. government ownership. It's quite the opposite. It is predatory insurance companies exerting their total control over the legislative process and over the White House and over the federal government in general, so that at this point, the average American family owes 10%, a tithe, if you will. 10% of your income is now owed to some predatory, rapacious gang of insurance company executives who, again, are deregulated, for-profit, and they are now in command. That is the essential thing that has been done. Now, the cover story for this, of course, is the 30 to 40 million people with no medical insurance, and naturally that is real. However, that story is a cloak. That is a cover, because the principal goal of this exercise is not to deliver care to the 30 to 40 million who are without it at this point. The goal of it is to use that story as a motivating factor and a cover story, a political cloak, to enact the takeover of this important sector of the federal government by these private insurance companies. It is the fascist corporate state. Let us just recall what this means. Some people, and we'll get to this in a second, are beginning to open their eyes. In the left liberal sector of opinion, we have Jane Hampshire of Fire Dog Lake and some others who have now understood that this is now fascism, neo-fascism, neo-feudalism. It is wonderful that the owl of Minerva takes flight at dusk in the gathering gloom. It would have been better to see all this 2 years ago or more when I began putting out my essays, the ones collected in particular in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, the making of a Manchurian candidate, where one of the first things I said is the only metric of comparison here is the young Mussolini and the Mussolini fascist corporate state. Also elaborated on that in Obama, the unauthorized biography. So what's the fascist corporate state? Again, this is not a term of derision. It's not saying, yeah, you're a communist, you're a socialist. The Republican approach to this stuff was this idiotic, infantile, schoolyard name-calling of things that simply do not apply, and they stand reality on their head. Again, this is not a government takeover. This is an insurance company takeover of the government. You've got to get that part straight, or you don't understand anything. It's amazing, the ideological prism of the right-wing mind. They see a takeover of the government by the insurance companies, and they call it a takeover of the insurance companies by the government. This is how ideology, in this case, free market, free enterprise ideology, stands reality on its head and makes reality unrecognizable. The fascist corporate state is the following. It is, first of all, a cartel. A cartel means that if you want to take part in a given area of economic activity, you have to be a member of the cartel. Now, cartels are formed as collusion, right, as conspiracies and restraint of trade, openly or secretly, in all sorts of ways. OPEC, the petroleum exporting countries, that's a cartel. In Europe, there have long been cartels in the steel industry and elsewhere. And in the U.S., there's essentially cartels, although here it's a little bit harder because of the antitrust laws. It has to be done in a somewhat surreptitious way. The cartel means if you want to take part in a given area of economic activity, you got to be in the cartel. You want to be in steel, you got to be in the steel cartel. Auto cartel for auto, sugar cartel, and so on down the line. But this time we're talking about not just any cartel, but a government-sponsored cartel. In other words, this is now the U.S. government, under the control of the insurance companies, is creating a cartel to keep out any possible competition. It basically says that the cartel is composed of the existing approved insider winning set of insurance companies and not any others that might want to enter the field or so forth. So it is a government-sponsored cartel, and it's compulsory because you're not allowed to participate in any of this. You will not count as insurance unless you're part of this gang, this cartel, which has now been legalized by the federal government. In other words, you've got to be Aetna or WellPoint or the Blues and so forth, right? You've got to be one of those companies and take part in this government-sponsored, sometimes state-sponsored, but here federal government is what it means, government-sponsored or state-sponsored compulsory cartel. Now, that part is the structural side, and that is already quite significant. Now, naturally, you could have a government-sponsored compulsory cartel for good purposes. Yes, it's possible. So let's see what the purposes of this specific cartel are. In this case, the specific cartel that we've got has sinister purposes. It has anti-economic, evil purposes. It has the following: to drive down the level of payments to doctors, to nurses, to hospital employees, to drive down payments to hospitals and other people that have to do with Medicare or Medicaid or with these government programs in general. So it is not to improve or expand the wages, working conditions, and levels of compensation for the people taking part, but to drive them down. This is the famous $500 billion of cuts in Medicare mandated by this idiotic program. We're now hearing from the veterans that their TRICARE, the retired veterans, get a program called TRICARE through the Pentagon. This is now being looted and sacked also in the framework of the triumph of the private insurance companies. So that is all driven down. So it's essentially to lower those levels and to lower the levels of service, because we've got MedPAC. MedPAC is the death board, the death panel. That is part of this legislation. They will decide what technology is appropriate and what they're going to deny you. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.